And so it's now 7 o'clock, and so we will call the meeting to order by roll call vote. And Daryl, I'll ask you to help keep me on the straight and narrow in Ellen's absence.
Okay, I'll do my best. There is
No
no
pressure.
substitute for Ellen, though.
There's not. And so do we want to just do a voice vote for folks? And
Sure. Daryl Beardsley present.
Pat Beavers present.
Lisa Camp present.
Rebecca Honeywell present.
Matt Vitale present. And I think that we don't have anything unanticipated to add to the agenda from my end of things. Mark, did you have anything to add under agents business?
I do not.
Fabulous. And it looks like we just got a late breaking update from Tom Corinne that he won't be able to join tonight. So we may end up asking Julie to come back for the 8:05 appointment, but we can get there when we get there.
Right. And it's possible that Julie also is not able to make it coincidentally. So
Fair enough.
Okay.
And so do we want to kind of Daryl, are you okay sharing your screen, or do you want me to share my screen?
you can share yours. I just always put this up as people are joining before you're on, but either way.
Perfect. Let me take over the screen sharing.
Okay.
Let me just make sure I'm not sharing my work email, because that is not the goal. Okay, perfect. Perfect. Do you guys see the folder?
Yep.
Perfect. So given that we've got 15 minutes before our first order of business, do you want to kind of zip through the permit renewals?
Sure.
Perfect. Daryl, my recollection is we can approve these in batch as long as everybody is the same status. Am I remembering that right?
Yes. If they're renewals, at least I think so. Mark, do you remember? I'm pretty sure we have. And there might be a difference of renewal and new, and I don't know. Mark, do you know offhand?
Well, we can just go through in order, because I think
Okay.
so do I have a motion to approve the renewal of the disposal works installer permit for DP and Sons excavation of Millis?
So moved.
Second.
And discussion would be, Mark, are they in good standing?
Yes, we don't see them in town too often, but they are in good standing. I've never had any issues with them. I don't know if they'll be picking up any work this year, but I have no problem with them being licensed, conditional to a pre-construction conference for any work that they do.
Okay, so our motion can be amended to include the pre-construction conference.
Sounds good. Hearing no further discussion.
Daryl, aye.
Matt Beavers, aye.
Lisa, I.
Rebecca Honeywell, aye.
Matt Vitale, aye. Do I have a motion to approve the disposal work installer permit for DL Atkinson Inc. of Needham, conditional to the pre-construction meeting?
So moved.
So second.
Seconded.
And Mark, same question again.
Yes, and again, another installer who we do not see working in town that often, but they're in good standings, and recommend that their permit be approved, conditional to a pre-construction conference for any work that they wish to do in town.
Sounds good. Hearing no further discussion.
Daryl, aye.
Matt Beavers, aye.
Lisa, I.
Rebecca Honeywell, aye.
Matt Vitale, aye. And do I have a motion to approve the renewal for the disposal works installer permit for Irving Trunky Co. Inc. of Millis, conditional to a pre-construction meeting?
So moved.
Second. And Mark.
Ditto to the previous comment, that again, they haven't worked in town that often, but in good standings, and I have no issue with them being approved, conditional to pre-construction for any work that they do.
Sounds good. Hearing no further discussion.
Daryl, I.
Matt Beavers, aye.
Lisa, I.
Rebecca Honeywell, I.
Matt Vitale, aye. And do I have a motion to approve the renewal for the disposal works installer permit for Rodenheiser Excavating of Holliston, conditional to the pre-construction meeting?
So moved.
Second.
Seconded.
And Mark, ditto?
Not in this case. They have been
Oh,
doing. work
okay.
on it. They've been doing work in town this year at 183 South Main, although there are differences between what they're planning to do. That, as Claire Golden said, belongs in court, not with us. We may end up with a situation where we have to have a Title V inspection done since they refuse to issue the installer's certificate. Again, not for our issue, but as relates to their work, I find no problem with their work. And again, if they pick up any additional work, they should be doing that with a pre-construction conference.
Okay, so it sounds like some of the issues we can address through that pre-construction conference.
That's correct. We always go through the full plan with the engineer. So that's why they've been doing the work according to the plan. It's just at the very end, there's some contractual issues that are not our issue. That unfortunately, the owner and the installer will need to resolve in court.
Okay,
But from our standpoint, it's not with compliance with, it's sort of a separate issue related in as much as it relates to the project, but not to the work under the supervision of the Board of Health. Do I have that right?
That is correct. We cannot force an installer to certify their work. Claire Golden with the DEP has indicated that if that does happen, and this is the second time now in 3 years, not with this contractor, with another one, it happened on Woodland. But in that case, as long as the quality work is being done, which I inspected, and the engineer is certified, that's pretty much our jurisdiction. So that's why I don't see any issue at this point. If it continues with other jobs, then we will need to maybe resolve that
Okay,
with the Board of Health.
sounds good. Thanks, Mark. Hearing no further discussion.
Daryl, I.
Matt Beavers, aye.
Lisa, I.
Rebecca Honeywell, I.
Matt Vitale, aye. Do I have a motion to approve the renewal for the disposal works installer permit for Pasquale Teddy of Sherborn, conditional to the pre-construction meeting?
So moved.
Second.
Seconded.
And-
Mark,
Yeah, and I can add just that we haven't seen him in town for many years, but I do know Pat. He's built quite a few septic systems. So again, no issue with him. Past work has been fine. Recommend approval, conditional to the pre-construction conferences.
sounds good. Hearing no further discussion.
Daryl, I.
Matt Beavers, aye.
Lisa, I.
Rebecca Honeywell, I.
Matt Vitale, aye. And then do I have a motion for a disposal works installer permit renewal for WC Row Court of Weston, conditional to pre-construction meeting?
So moved.
Seconded.
Second.
And Mark,
And
any in
Same.
good standing?
Good standing, haven't worked in town in a long time as well, but I think the installers do like to keep their permits up to standard and up to the date. So again, I have no problem with this one being approved, conditional to the pre-construction conferences.
Sounds good. And hearing no further discussion.
Daryl, I.
Matt Beavers, aye.
Lisa, I.
Rebecca Honeywell, I.
Matt Vitale, aye. And then it looks like we've got Paul Gouveia. So do I have a motion to approve the disposal work installer permit renewal for Paul Gouveia of Rehoboth?
Subject to pre-construction.
There
Conference.
you go. That's a good one. Subject to pre-construction conference.
So moved.
Second.
And Mark, in good standing.
In good standing again, on all these except for Rodenheiser, we don't see them that often in town. Maybe 2 to 5 years ago, they might have been in town, but they like to keep their permits active in case there is a job could get, they would be ready to go on that job. So I recommend approval.
Sounds good. Hearing no further discussion.
Daryl, I.
Matt Beavers, aye.
51 to 49 majority.
Yes. Hello?
Hello?
Lisa, I.
Rebecca, if you're an aye, we
Rebecca
don't hear
just
you.
went off. No, she.
She dropped off. Okay. Matt Vitale, aye. And so we will count Rebecca as absent for that one. And then we have the permit for the tobacco nicotine delivery product sales permit for Sherborn Wine and Spirits renewal for approval.
I am going to, let's see, I'm going to assume that this has already had Tom's review. But I don't know if we want to make it a condition to confirmation of that.
I think we should. So do I have a motion to approve this conditional to confirmation of review by Tom?
I
So
think that-
moved.
Yeah, second.
Hearing no further discussion.
So I'll borrow from what Matt Beavers mentioned last time, that odd that we get to approve the tobacco and nicotine delivery, but in any case, Daryl, I.
Yeah, same here. Matt Beavers, aye.
Reluctant, I.
Matt
Lisa.
Vitale, Matt Vitale, aye.
And
All right.
Rebecca's just connecting again. Whoops, and she dropped off again before I got to let her in.
I let her in.
Oh, you
Yeah.
did? Oh, okay.
Rebecca, are you there? Can you hear us? Oops. Hello?
She's muted.
I am here now. Sorry,
Perfect.
I drove to a dead zone.
No worries.
I
So
dropped you. I dropped you, but I know there was a quorum, so it's fine that I didn't vote on the last one. Sorry.
I think that sounds good. And why don't we treat Rebecca? We were just voting on the tobacco sales permit. Do you want to abstain since you weren't here for just that portion of it?
Sure.
Perfect. Okay. Duly noted. I think that takes us through our permit renewals. We've got 2 minutes until our first appointment. Do we want to? Did folks have any substantive edits to the minutes of 11:16? Do we want to vote on those in our 2-minute window?
I did some cleanup, made I think there was a correction from X to V, but it really is, Mass DEP uses the numeric 5. So that was a biggie. And a little bit of other cleanup here and there, just to clarify the flow of certain things and
Okay.
some technical terms.
So
Yeah,
it's
same
not,
here. I imagine I submitted a lot of the same edits.
okay. Do we want to approve the minutes as amended?
So moved.
Seconded.
And hearing no further discussion?
Daryl, I.
Matt Beavers, aye.
Lisa, I.
Rebecca Honeywell, aye.
And Matt Vitale abstain as I was not a participant. I think we're at 7:15. And so I think that for our 7:15 agenda item, we've got the regulatory review for some of the language that we Matt Beavers and I had worked on with Ellen and Mark over the summer. I think that we'll probably be able to wrap that up in less than the half hour before the variance hearing. So I would then propose that we go to, after you conclude that, MCP update from Ms. Camp, and then the well regulation discussion. I don't know if, so with that, I'll sort of transition into the proposed changes here. I think that what we have done here is really capture the existing workflows that have been in place many years for the board in terms of the just memorializing the existing workflows into the regulation to make it clear and transparent to folks kind of what the steps in the process are. So I don't think any of this represents a deviation from what we always do. It's just an articulation of that process within our regulations to make sure it's clear to folks. Matt, I don't know if you have anything else you want to add, or we can kind of briefly go through the substance of it with an open invitation to Mark to opine.
Yeah, no, I think that says it. So let's go through it.
And so in terms of, by way of background, Matt and I did some working sessions with Mark and with Ellen to just make sure that we had the existing regulations well understood, and then kind of understood the process. For both of these, I think, again, it's a process we've discussed before. I probably won't go through every word of the text unless folks want me to, and thought we could focus a little bit on kind of key pieces. And so, as we all know, under section 4, we've got the timeline requirement, which is triggered upon the application being complete. And so we have treated it as complete applications that satisfy the conditions below. And again, this is just describing that. So it requires the disposal works construction permit application form and the associated fee be submitted to the board, that the plan include the distance to any leach line, seepage pit, or other means of subsurface disposal from any private well or other private source of water supply to be used for drinking purposes or culinary uses as required in section 10, as well as those areas that are covered under CONCOM. So let's just pause there. Is there anything that people feel like should be worded differently in that section B?
I didn't see anything. I like that the word complete is included several times. I think it's consistent with the procedures that have been in place, and on various forms, application forms that people have to fill out. It indicates what should be submitted, but this just codifies it in our regulations.
Perfect.
I think it looks good.
Perfect. And again, that we sort of confirmed and worked on this with a lot of help from Mark and Ellen. So then,
I do have, oops, sorry. I have a
go ahead,
question.
fire away.
Now that I've thought about, now that we're codifying it, is it going to be a little trickier to update if there's something unusual that comes up for a property? But Mark, I don't know if you've ever seen that, where we need something different because of strange conditions at a property or a project.
I believe this pretty much covers what our attempt was, and that's to make sure that the applicant knew Conservation Commission approval was required prior to our review of the plan.
Oh, okay.
So, and it references section 10, which has the distance requirements for the plan itself. So I think this is thorough for the purpose of the plan submittal.
Okay.
And then just as kind of follow up, after we do this phase of things, we review as a board. If we get to a place where we say we're now ready to have town council review and opine, that would be the next stage before the public hearing as part of our sort of larger regulatory revision. So I think our goal for today is to say, is this final enough to have Ellen take one more look once she's back in the office, and then to get town council feedback. So section C is a written copy of an administrative approval, negative determination of applicability or order of conditions from the Sherborn Conservation Commission pursuant to the application being submitted. And so, and I think that's going to Mark's point, which is, this is one of the parts that's an important sequencing step and helps us make sure that we're doing the right work once as opposed to the wrong work twice.
So this is just basically ensuring that if there's any deviation of the default setbacks for wetlands, that CONCOM has approved it before it comes to us.
Right, essentially that CONCOM has done their review process and provided guidance to the applicant prior to that plan being submitted, since we couldn't consider it if it hadn't been yet determined, since that would drive pieces of our basis for making a determination.
And that we need something more than word of mouth that it was approved in a meeting.
Perfect. And then Matt, I'm trying to remember, when I was re-reviewing this, I was trying to remember D. And I remember that we had a fair amount of discussion, but I don't remember all the content of the discussion about how the well fit in. So this is a particular area. If you remember something different, feel free to weigh in. But this was essentially saying that if we're having, as we consider the septic plans, we need to know where the well will be in association with it. And so this is a requirement for a permit approving the supply, an application for a well, or if you're replacing, doing a replacement system and have an existing well, nothing new is required. But it's essentially to say, when we're considering the septic plans, the well position should be established either in an application phase or in an existing phase. Does that match up with your recollection, Matt?
Sorry. I think what we spent the most time on is just ensuring that we're consistent across this and the next one, that really for both, for a well, you need to know where the septic's going to be. For a septic, you need to know where the well is going to be, but like allowing for the exception if there's an existing well. And so I think that
Are you
ends up-
saying, oh, sorry, go ahead.
so I think this ends up covering all conditions. Like the goal here is that we want to say that like we want to act on well and septic at the same time. And so we either need to know where it's going to be or where it is. And I think this covers that.
So is a point of this that if you are doing like a replacement septic but you're not changing the well location, you don't need to reapply for like a
Right.
well and vice versa.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Okay. Can we, and I don't, maybe this is covered in the previous section, but we want that explicitly shown on the plans. Was that covered in the previous section? I think it was,
Yeah,
right?
section B1.
Okay, that's what I thought. Okay, that's good.
And let's just make sure, yeah, and so I guess one question is under, or I guess it's, B1, distance from any leach line, seepage pit, or other means from any private well or other private source of water supply to be used for drinking purposes. And so, again, I think that in this case, I would say if both are in the contemplative phase for a new project, then I would imagine this would be the site of a proposed well. I feel okay not including the phrase from any private well, or like, I don't feel like we need to add or proposed well there. I feel like it's connected enough. Do folks agree?
I actually just caught something though. What about irrigation wells? Because we're saying they still have to meet potability standards to be an irrigation well, which we approve only on a case by case basis, like an agricultural well. So should that also be shown on the map? I would like that.
Okay. So
I was wondering if that's what, I had the same question, but wondered if private well covered that, because any private well in town has to be of potable quality, whether it's intended for irrigation.
Yeah, but
And I wasn't really sure what or other
Graham.
private source of water supply, like when would that apply?
To be used for drinking purposes. So it's got a qualifier. I would like to expand that and just be explicit that, either say private,
private well, comma,
for
irrigation
any-
well.
For any purpose or permitted private well for any purpose, including but not limited to irrigation.
How about just from any private well done?
I'm wondering if that other source could relate. There are few people who have dug wells in town.
Well, that's
And
still,
that wouldn't be
that's
really
still-
a well, that's well, it's a dug well.
It's-
Maybe it
it's
is.
still a
Yeah,
well.
It's still a well. I'm less worried about that versus people omitting agricultural or irrigation well. So, which I would definitely like to know the location of as well. So
why don't we put permitted private well, comma, irrigation well, comma, or other private source of water supply to be used for drinking purposes or culinary uses?
or culinary
I think
or
any private
agricultural.
well. I think
Yeah,
any
Yeah.
private well.
Like, why not just say any private well?
And then just take out,
For any purpose. For any
Yeah.
purpose.
Right, just say any private well, perfect.
so I will take out or other private source of water supply.
Because
So-
then it just begs the question, it's sort of omitting things. So
Yeah.
we either need to make it broad enough to encompass everything or list everything.
Yeah.
And since we're
And-
covering, should we also include public water supply here, since we would certainly expect that to be on the
Yes.
plan?
Yes, and
Yeah.
that's where I could see having any private well or other, take out private, other source of water supply to be used for blah, 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 blah. Just in
If-
case. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know that anyone's drawing from the Charles, but if they ever do, that would be a surface water supply. I don't know.
Well, and I believe this definition, B1 came from section 10.1 of our regulations. It's exact wording for 10.
Oh, okay.
So that's how you got all these words in there, but
Then maybe we
agree.
would need to update that too, because
yeah, that's what I'm thinking is our 10.1 may need to be updated to say the same thing that this says.
So can we make a little note to remember to do that?
Yep.
Okay.
Section.
But
I would also sort of, oh, go ahead, Matt.
I think I make a note to refer to it, but I don't know if we should say for sure that they should be the same.
We should just look at it.
Yeah, I think we want this to be more inclusive is the point.
Yeah,
Hmm.
I think that sounds good. So the language I've got is the distance, a bunch of blah, blah, disposal from any private well or other source of water supply.
okay,
Period, for number one.
yeah.
And again, I think we'll get town council guidance as well in terms of the consistency. Maybe that's a question about, do we need to be the same language as 10.1, or is this fine? Because I do like a broad definition here, since again, this is saying, what do you want to reflect? You should really reflect all these things on a plan to make sure it's clear and transparent. And it's different than saying we are, like, it's a feature of the plan, not a regulation imposed on the associated water supply.
You want to say private or public regardless of source?
I think that if we can say, or other source of water supply, because I think that is, the public or semi-public, it keeps that out, and I think is as broad as possible, which I think is the intent for inclusion on the plan to allow consideration, for variances, particularly for a replacement system.
So we're
Okay.
gonna take out the second private, Matt, or other source of water supply?
So I think we're going to take out
The second
where this
private,
is from any
Second, and we
private
take out the
well
second private,
or
yeah,
other source of water supply.
yeah,
Period. And we'll take out to be used for drinking purposes or culinary purposes. So we'll take
And-
out that private and
yeah,
the
okay.
end of the sentence. Sound
Okay.
good?
Yep.
Yeah.
Perfect.
So I think I just quickly went and looked at the other section 10,
Okay,
which I guess I think it's fine for them to be different here. The only issue is that section 10 really limits the distance requirements to those wells used for drinking purposes.
okay.
And so then I guess the question is, do we need to make sure, it's sort of a separate question, whether irrigation wells also need to meet those, because I'm not sure that we say that in our current regulations.
I
there are
think
different
private permitted
distances.
well should meet it, because we're saying that they have to meet the potability standards, and we're not fans of having multiple wells on a property anyway, but just to make sure that whatever water sources are being used for any purpose are gonna be safe, I think makes sense.
So that would mean we should then revise
Yeah.
section 10.
Yeah, I
We
agree.
should, because it has lesser distances for irrigation wells.
So
Yeah.
I'm gonna put a pin in that as a topic for further
Yeah.
regulatory review. It sounds like we're comfortable for this language in terms of things to revise and move forward for town council.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect. As we then sort of roll down to D, we're covering either a permit that's approved, a submitted plan, or a complete application for a well, or if you already have a well, because this is a replacement system not required for section D. For section E, this is the EHIR requirement that is separately listed, but again, if it is required, it would need to be completed and submitted in order for the application to be considered complete and to start the 45-day clock for consideration. And so any application for approval of a sewage disposal system shall be considered filed on the date upon which a complete application is presented by the person who is seeking the permit or their authorized representative. So
Can I ask a question? And this is
Sure.
probably maybe too out there and controversial. If someone is doing a replacement system because their system was in failure and they did not, and at the time of failure, they did not meet the setback requirements that we have in place, should we also require sampling of the drinking water supply, sort of to confirm that it hasn't been impacted by a failed system before, we're going to let them put in a new one?
What was the scenario? There was the nitrogen loading scenario for the property on Main Street that was maybe 6 or 9 months ago. Was that one where it was a setback failed to meet Title V? I'm trying to remember what the basis for nitrogen, because I think it was a nitrate testing requirement.
I believe that's correct. That was on North Main Street. And we did require them to test that well. And that
Yeah.
decision wasn't made during the variance hearing based on the distance from the proposed septic system to the existing well.
Mhm.
I don't know if we required it for an existing failing system to the well to have the testing done, but it's not a bad idea because we're not for sure how that system impacted the existing
Right.
well.
Well, that's what I was just thinking. Like, I don't want it to be punitive, but I don't want people drinking water
Drinking
that
water.
maybe got impacted by a failed system that wasn't meeting the setbacks because it was, grandfathered in and all that stuff. And so it's not meant to be punitive, it's meant to be protective.
I would probably pull it in a different, just because this is like milestones for plan completeness. And I
Yeah.
think this is more process for a failed system. So I'd probably keep it out of this
Separate.
regulation. And
Okay.
maybe when we look at section 10.1, that
Yeah.
can be a
Okay,
subsection. Does that sound okay?
totally
Perfect.
fine.
And then we made no changes to soil testing other than changing it from A to B. And then for plan submittal, I don't remember what a wet stamp and signature is. Mark, can you refresh my memory on that part?
What was that again, Matt? I'm sorry.
It just can't be a
Under-
photocopy.
Under plan submittal, it was all with a wet stamp and signature. And so I think, is that just no photocopy needs to be an original?
That is correct, except we do want the original to have that original stamp and the rest can be copied. Did I answer that correct for you?
Why did we change this?
I can't remember. Maybe this is when we can ask Ellen why we changed it, because I can't remember that one.
I don't remember why we changed it either.
Okay, I will email Ellen to see if she can remember why we changed it.
I know in the past, it's been typical to require that at least one plan have an inked, so to speak, signature as opposed to an electronic signature.
That is correct.
Yeah, I just don't know why we said all of them have to have that.
Yeah, I mean, and also, is that a little outdated? Because like I know we used to, for all my MCP submittals, we used to do like a stamp and send it in, but now everything's electronic. So is that maybe sort of an antiquated requirement?
It may be, Lisa, I believe with all the technology, it probably is outdated.
I feel like if we're discussing it on a Zoom, it's tough to say, no, the only good thing is handwritten.
Yeah, I totally agree. I don't think that's necessary at this point.
Well, except we still receive plans in paper.
But I guess
Even though
the
we're
question-
seeing them all electronically now, they still come in paper.
So I guess if this is a bold and this is an addition to be considered
Yeah.
complete, what's the thing we're trying to protect from by introducing this new requirement? Or it may be that this is, well, let's be clear, like if what we're doing is codifying our process, it may be this is what we've always done. I think that the question of, is this an important part of our workflow versus, at least one of which with a stamped stamp and signature.
I guess it begs the question of how would we know, even if it was a wet stamp and signature, that it wasn't
Right.
made by somebody else and not
Yeah.
the actual PE, which is a problem overall. So
I mean, you could say
Right.
the same thing about my LSP license. You have to know the number, you have to, there's certainly legal implications if you're falsifying.
So why don't we take out all with a wet stamp and signature to just say all with a stamp and signature?
I like that.
Okay,
Because I think that keeps us to saying, hey, we need this to, like, otherwise there's nothing that requires it to be signed, which it certainly needs to be signed. But we're not attached to a particular mode of signing, which I think helps future-proof the regulation, depending on, you know, how plans are submitted 10 years from now.
how about all with, oh, sorry,
Oh, go ahead.
all with a stamp and signature of the qualified engineer?
That feels a little redundant.
Is it?
I think
We
Okay.
say
so.
they must be prepared by a qualified engineer with a wet stamp and signature from that engineer.
Or
Okay,
I guess we just don't
sanitary,
need both.
yeah. And I think it will still be, if somebody's like, oh, I thought anybody could sign it. I had Fred, he's my lawn guy. Then I think you'd say whoever the health agent was or the health, you know, Board of Health Administrator, be like, yeah, Fred can't sign it.
well, you know,
but-
there will be people who will challenge this at some point, especially now
Yeah.
that you pointed it out.
Yeah, I think because of,
The
I mean,
irony will be,
I mean, we could just say prepared by a qualified registered sanitary and civil or sanitary engineer bearing their stamp and signature.
yes,
like
that's
it.
what I was gonna say too, including theirs. Yep.
perfect. All right. Noted. And then let's go down to the domestic water supply. And so similarly, you know, the consideration of a complete application will be upon satisfying these conditions. So we have a completed well construction permit application form signed by the property owner and the associated fee. Plan drawn to scale indicating boundary lines of the applicant's property, the location and number of wells as required in section 6 and 7, and the location of all existing and proposed structures and septic systems within 200 feet of each existing or proposed well in the applicant's property. And the location of any existing or proposed driveway, right-of-way, or traveled way is defined in sections 2.5, 2.6, and 2.7. That felt all pretty straightforward to me. Any questions or concerns are okay, perfect. And then similarly to the regulation above, we need demarcation of any Concom relevant areas, as well as written approval from Concom for an administrative approval, negative determination of applicability, or order of conditions from Concom, the proposed location. And then similarly, once you've checked the boxes, it will be considered complete on the date at which it's filed, having satisfied the conditions above. Sound good?
Yep.
So in terms of follow-ups, I've got that we've got a
Tom
future.
has his hand raised.
What was that?
Tom Trainer has his hand raised.
Oh, sure. Tom, fire away.
Thank you. Just had a quick question, because, you know, we just, with an intern reviewed almost 400 of the well and septic files. About half of them didn't have any well records. Of course, you know, many of them many decades old, and there's reasons for that. In your language right there, would it be a problem just adding a requirement for the GIS location of the well?
Well, so this is to just put the well in. Won't we make that to approve it, that they are gonna have to like provide well logs, GIS locations? I mean, we can do it here too, but I think certainly that's gonna be a requirement to, you know, get the approval to use it. This is just to construct it. So what happens if they have to move it a little bit? You know, I don't know.
Sure.
I agree with you
yeah,
that
if-
it's there. I just don't know, is it at this
If
point?
this is happening somewhere else, of course, that's fine. Sure.
So why don't we put a pin in that one too for the GIS location of well, to just
Sure.
figure out sort of where that fits, because I agree. I think this is sort of the plan phase to say it's complete. And it's hard to say you have to give me a GIS location for an undug well, because if they say we hit X, Y, and Z,
Right,
you
yeah,
know,
like.
might need to
it can
change.
happen.
Or
But it-
if we don't approve it, right?
Right,
Right.
Yep. Right, that makes sense.
Yeah, but I totally agree with Tom. Like, I definitely think as part of the, you know, the use permit, once it's constructed, they definitely need to provide us all that information. And so that going forward, we're going to have good well logs, right, Tom? So this won't be such a nightmare to understand the depths and where things are located.
Oh, that's perfect. Thanks.
Except it is true that it would be easier if the GIS information is present at this stage to confirm that everything is applying to the same spot. Like it wouldn't hurt to have the information there. And if it's moved,
we're just saying GIS is exceedingly precise and they might need to move it a little. So then would they need
right,
to
so
get
then they
the image?
adjust but then they note the new location.
But I guess we
in the
don't,
final
we
plan.
We're
don't,
going to say we're going to do that. They're going to do that. We're going to require that later anyway, Rebecca. To me, like to approve the right to construct a well, that doesn't seem a necessity. Because we want the as-built. That's what we want.
Yeah, I would echo that. Because again, I think if we say, oh, well, we installed the septic system here, or we're going to, but then we hit ledge and we needed to move it over, that moved the well location. I would prefer to base the GIS off the as-built, because otherwise I worry somebody will say, well, we sent you that already, but it's wrong. And it feels like the whole point is to say we want good data that's highly reliable.
yeah, I think I
But is
agree.
it-
My worry is that if we're submitting data potentially twice, it just increases chances for error. So we should require it once at the most, we're at the point at which we have the most information.
And I agree with that in that when the well is done, all sorts of information comes in: depth, yield, soils encountered, where's bedrock. There's a lot more information, and GIS fits right in with that. We will not effectively use the GIS location at this part of granting a permit.
So for our next steps, we've got a future.
Don't we
session.
need to prove that we granted a permit for us the right location?
This is
No,
to
no, but this
construct
is-
it. This is
this
to
is-
construct only, not.
Well,
the
and this is and it's also like, this is like even one stage further up. This is saying, when is your application complete? And so I think that we
Mhm.
should ask them to provide it when we, like, based on our approval, because we may say, no, we want it here, or you did this construction. So I don't think we're saying we don't need it. I think what we're saying is this is not the proper time to ask for it for the stage that this regulation is regulating, which is, when is your application complete? So for our follow-ups, we've got pins in two topics. One, like three topics. One is just taking a look at 10.1 to think about what that update looks like. One is the handling of a failed well. And then one is where do we incorporate the GIS location and well logs for a replacement well? Sort of where in the regulation should that sit? It sounds like we have consensus that should sit within the regulations. It sounds like, at least for most of the board, the feeling is when we've gotten to the as-built stage, that is kind of part of that closure process to say, yep, this was where it was, this is the location. I think the thing for us to think about is if we had somebody sort of had one of our drought mediated well failures. Mark, do you get as-built plans for well drilling? Or is that just for the septics?
I do get, well, it's the well drill report from the state. They're required by state law to submit a well drill report, which shows the GPS coordinates for that location where the well was drilled, as well as the depth and additional information. As well as we have a well data form that's required, and that's submitted to show the pumping of that well and its flow rate. So we do get quite a bit of information after the plan's approved and the well is drilled.
And Mark, did we update the, oh, go ahead, Daryl.
I was just going to say that I don't think the DEP is currently enforcing the GIS
Well, could we
requirement.
do
So
it
we
on our
might
well
need
data
to just
form?
reinforce that ourselves.
That's a good point, Daryl. It is true that, you know, if they don't show it, there's not much enforcement action on that. So it wouldn't hurt to add it if you so wish to.
So let's put a pin in that, just because it's not a listed topic for tonight, but I wonder if that data form is a good place to do it, so we can include that on a future agenda. And it looks like we're now at 7:45. I see Jamie Bissonette from ZCE, and we've got 100 Maple Street on the agenda. And And so, Jamie, I think what I'd suggest we do is, Mark, do you want to give a little bit of background and introduction to any discussion you've had with Jamie? And then we'll let Jamie go through the plan, and then we'll go to the letter and look at the variances.
That's fine. Just so the board knows, this plan was seen by the board a little bit back with a different engineer, but this engineer preferred to use a system called the Presby. And it's a system that fits into a smaller area with the contours and so forth. So that was the decision of this engineer to go move forward with this septic system. So they're coming back to us with the plan and the needed waivers. The board has granted some of these waivers prior, but the previous system wasn't a bed, if I remember right. And so they're coming back, and I can check that. I have that plan here with me. They're coming back to ask for that one additional waiver plus the other three that they had asked for in the prior plan.
Yeah. And I think it would be worth just going through all of the variances again. I don't think it takes that much more time, since we've heard the reasoning before, but since it is a whole new plan, I think it'd be cleaner to just associate these approvals with this new plan.
No, I think that makes a ton of sense. And then, in the absence of Ellen, Gerald, do you happen to know if we've gotten all the green cards back?
So we have, apparently they are waiting for a few more. So what we could do is, if they haven't received them yet, like there are a few that were undeliverable, I believe, and they need to get that back from the post office or some kind of indication of that. So we could, if we approve everything, we could then just make the release of the plans conditional to receipt of those final cards, essentially, or records of the card status.
Sounds perfect. So Jamie, do you want to kind of orient us to the plan and talk a little bit about what you have in mind, and then we'll flip over the variances after?
Sure. I thought Mark was going to go first, but I'm happy to present. Either way is fine with me.
Perfect. I think you're good to go. I think Mark usually just gives us kind of a high-level overview, and then we let the engineer say, this is what I was working with. It was a little bit of a nightmare. There was sludge, there was water, there was adventure.
Sure.
And then so, you can kind of go through that to help give us some of the context that informs the variances that you requested, because our general experience is you guys work really hard to minimize how many variances you're asking for, and this just helps us understand that.
Nope, I appreciate that, and we certainly do. So, all right, so to start off, my name is Jamie Bissonette. I'm a professional engineer with Zenith Consulting Engineers in Lakeville, Massachusetts. We were given this project and asked to try to make it something that the homeowner, the property owner, could actually maybe secure some installation bids on. He was having a difficult time getting people to bid on the previous project. I spoke with one installer, and they said that their concern was the retaining wall on the previous plan. And Mark was right that the previous plan was trenches. It was trenches, and they had a wall pretty much on the 100-foot buffer line. So in our case here, what we did was we went out to the site, took a look. We actually found that the well was in for lack of a better word, an extension in front of the house. So it's actually in the basement, but it's not part of the basement. It has a ceiling and 3 sides on it, and so it's kind of like a cavern that you can walk into, and it's very nice. It's lit and stone bottom. It was very I've never seen anything like it in my 20+ years of doing this. But so for the old plan, it was shown into the foundation. It's actually forward where we're showing it on this plan. And I'm sure you guys are familiar with a surveyor named Dan O'Driscoll. Dan's definitive survey plan also showed it in the same area. I've known Dan for a long time. And when I saw his plan and the septic design, it made me want to go down and take a look at it. And that was why we really spent some time to get that. So anyways, that distance of a couple of feet allowed us the ability to sneak the septic a little bit further away to try to get closer to the 125 foot to the wetlands as part of your request, your regulations, I'm sorry, while also maintaining the 125 feet to the well per the regulations as well. So what we were able to do with the Presby, some of the advantages of the Presby, and Mark mentioned one is the reduced footprint. But some more advantages of it are DEP has waived the requirement of a 5-foot overdig, which helps us with grading issues. And it also allows us to take advantage of breakout from the bottom of the sand for the system. So you travel out 15 feet from the bottom of the Presby C33 style sand, and that's where your breakout starts. So again, what we were able to do here by using a Presby bed, we're able to eliminate a retaining wall and maximize our separation distance to both the wetlands and still keep the 125 plus feet to the well. Unfortunately, because of the arc of the well, as you can see on the plan, to keep the 125 feet, the closest we can get is about 11 feet to the property line. And so that is one of the waivers that we're requesting. Also, the previous variance request to the wetlands was closer than ours. We're actually getting a little further away, and we're able to get up to about 121 feet. So that's better than what the previous plan was for separation, but not by much. It's just by feet. Also, in the process of doing the design, we had a plumber go out to the house because I looked at the proposed plumbing on the last plan to get gravity to work. And I thought it would be extremely tight with the sill of the house and the existing plumbing. The owner had a plumber come out and said that we could not meet those elevations. So what we're doing is we're keeping the elevation of the existing plumbing because we couldn't get it high enough to go gravity, unfortunately. So this system is also a pump as opposed to the previous design, which was by gravity. What we're doing to make sure that we don't have any issues with freezing of water is we're burying the 1.5-inch force main down at about 4 feet or greater. And where it comes up on the ends, there'll be rigid insulation to minimize any type of potential for freezing. I actually have this application at my house with the 4 feet bury and the insulation, and it's worked fantastic for me for the past 8 years. We've done it on a number of projects, so I think this will be a nice fit. As far as the bed is concerned, I know that was waiver number 1, and that's the new waiver. We really think the Presby is a good fit here. We do use the Presby on a number of situations, but not every one. The Presby is approved IA for general use and remedial through the DEP. They only allow bed configurations in their approval. We cannot do trenches with the Presby. The Presby itself, because of the aggregate list system, it being C33 sand, they do get to take advantage of a size reduction. They base it on Darcy's law. And we've had a very good track record of these things lasting, in the ground. I actually, knock on wood, have not had one fail yet, and I've been designing them for over 10 years. So I don't know if there's anything else that we need to go over in detail, but I'm happy to answer any questions you might have and address any issues that you see.
Well, I'm just going to knock on wood on your behalf to avoid any potential jinx with the no failure.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Any questions from the board, or I've got the plan up, or I can flip over to the letter.
I don't think I have any other questions. Mark, any particular comments on any of that?
You'll see the distance now from the edge of the Presby septic system leaching area to the wetlands is 121.6 feet. The previous plan that was approved back in April was 103 feet. So that is one advantage to reducing the size. The other plan was approved on April 6th of 2022. So I just wanted to point that out.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Mark. I will flip over to the letter and we can get into the variances. Sound good? So the first is this variance for section 1.2. Do a motion for an approval for variance for section 1.2 for the bleaching bed construction with a pressure distribution system.
So moved.
Seconded.
Any further discussion? Hearing none.
Daryl, I.
Matt Beavers, aye.
Lisa, I.
Rebecca Honeywell, I.
Matt Vitale, aye. Do I have a motion for a variance to section 10.2 to allow reduction of the setback to the property line, which enables a greater distance from the drinking well?
So moved.
Seconded.
Any further discussion? Hearing none.
Daryl, I.
Matt Beavers, aye.
Lisa, I.
Rebecca Honeywell, I.
Matt Vitale, aye. And do I have a motion for a variance to section 10.2 as it relates to the wetland setback, which, as Mark noted, is an increased setback compared to the previously approved plan?
So moved.
Seconded.
Any further discussion? Daryl, on the Concom side, this would all be covered. Like they've sort of looked at the wetland piece of this. Do I have that
Oh, yeah.
process sort of right? Perfect. Okay.
Yep.
Sounds
They wouldn't
good.
have gotten to a hearing without
Perfect.
having their approval. So
Perfect. Any further discussion? Hearing none.
Daryl, I.
Matt Beavers, aye.
Lisa, I.
Rebecca Honeywell, I.
Matt Vitale, aye. And then for the last one, do we have a variance for section 8.02 with distance for a subsurface sewage disposal system for maximum groundwater of less than 5 feet as a natural surface condition?
So moved.
Seconded.
Any further discussion? Hearing none.
Daryl, I.
Matt Beavers, aye.
Lisa, I.
Rebecca Honeywell, I.
Matt Vitale, aye. And then Mark and Jamie, my recollection is there any increase in design flow at this plan? I couldn't remember that.
No, there is not.
Perfect. Sounds good. And Mark, are the plans ready for approval?
Yes, they are, and that's conditional to deed recordings for a garbage grinder waiver, as well as deed recording for the use of the Presby, which is an innovative alternative technology. But there is one additional one. I don't know if the board wishes to have this as a condition or just I can do it during pre-construction. We received an email from Joyce Hastings, the Conservation Commission agent, and that was sent to us on September 20th, asking if we could add that the commission needs to inspect the erosion control barrier prior to the commencement of the work. She asked if that could be added as a condition of the Board of Health approval. So that was the third one.
And then the fourth one would be for the green cards.
And could the erosion control condition be incorporated within the pre-construction meeting?
That is correct, but during your vote, it probably would be a compliment.
Yeah.
Requesting, but the two deed recordings, the two that are the major ones, but as Daryl said, we will have to make sure all the green cards are received, as well as, I'll work with them during pre-construction on the conservation request. But I mean, if you put it, I believe.
I like putting it in. I just want to make sure I'm putting it in right. So
Yeah,
do I have a motion to approve the plans as provided with the conditional to the deed recordings for the garbage grinder and the IA technology, as well as conditional to inclusion of review of the erosion control measures by Conservation Commission in the pre-construction meeting and confirmation of appropriate receipt and return of green cards, including records for those not delivered?
So moved.
Seconded.
And then
And
Jamie,
I just wanted to ask Mark if, so Concom would come to the pre-construction meeting?
Since they've requested that, I would make sure that is part of the pre-construction conference.
Yeah, okay,
If they're
great.
not available, then I'll refer them to conservation and not to start the septic system until I know the Conservation Commission is satisfied with that request.
Okay.
And Jamie, any concerns from your standpoint on that?
No, hopefully we get the last green card back.
I'll knock on wood for that too.
I appreciate that.
Sounds good.
right.
Perfect. Hearing no further discussion. Do I have a vote to approve those plans?
Daryl, I.
Matt Beavers, aye.
Lisa, I.
Rebecca Honeywell, aye.
Matt Vitale, aye. Jamie, thanks so much. Have a good night.
Thank you, you too.
All right, with that, I will go back to the agenda.
Oh, Jamie,
Okay.
while you're still on, the language for deed recordings will be mailed out to you.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you.
Perfect. All right. Thanks, Daryl. Why don't I don't see Julie on. I will try to interrupt us at 8:05 to just acknowledge that we will move this to a future meeting given Tom can't join us tonight for the follow-up for the Sweet Meadow Farm complaint and corrections that were made.
And if I may, Matt, if I
Yep.
may, that's why when you were asking me that question prior, I was trying to answer to Tom Curran. He did want to let the board know that obviously he can't be at the meeting, but he said he can report that Sweet Meadow has made all the modifications and corrections
Perfect.
he had asked of them, and he's working with the owner to ensure avoidance of any repeat issues surrounding the findings of the inspection and nature of the complaint.
Perfect. I think that is encouraging. I think it still probably makes sense to at least tentatively include it on the 12/21 agenda. But that sounds good. Lisa, can I pass the baton to you for the MCP update?
Sure. So I just was going to give a super brief update on 2 sites that are regulated under the state environmental regulations, which is called the Massachusetts Contingency Plan. And they are both oil releases from home heating oil sources. One of them is on 27 Oldfield Drive, and this is all public record, so there's no issue with me, identifying these locations. And that was a release that apparently took place last March. And a contractor from Dorchester was the person who issued the release notification form to DEP and is taking allegedly responsibility for the cleanup. Very little information provided. They were out of compliance. They were supposed to submit a notice, or that basically additional information for the 120-day reporting obligation in August. They finally did it in September, and basically just saying that there was some release from an unknown source to soil of maybe 20 gallons, no information on how it happened, what it was, the extent of it. And basically DEP issued to this person, the performing party, Barry Noon, a notice of responsibility and said, look, you need to assess it and either clean it up and close it out and by September of 2023, or do a phase 1 report and a tier classification. And by the way, you need to hire an LSP, etc. There's no additional information on the website. So that sort of concerns me a little bit, because basically I don't know any more information than the address and that there was some kind of release. So I just think that's something that somehow somebody might want to follow up on. I can try and call DEP in my quote spare time and just say, have you gotten any more information? We have all private wells in this town, so I would like to know more about it. But anyway, that's all I know at this point. And then the second one is, I think we're all familiar with, it's at 177 Lake Street. That was a 2-hour reporting obligation. It was a sudden release of close to 300 gallons of home heating oil. That there's a few theories of how it happened, that there's a line and an oil filter that was connecting 2 330-gallon above ground storage tanks that were in the basement of a home that was unoccupied at the time of the release. The Sherborn Fire Department actually were the first people on site and did the reporting to DEP. That responsible party has hired an LSP. They did collect some soil samples and did soil borings and installed 2 monitoring wells on the downgrading edge. It's only like 165 feet from Farm Pond. There's been no evidence of oil migrating to Farm Pond with surface flow. Some booms were put out just as a sort of secondary containment, just in case. And there was no oil found in the monitoring wells, which were on the downgrading edge of the property. So between the residence and Farm Pond, and there was nothing detected in the water. So that's good, because I think a lot of us were concerned about that. The house is vacant. They have been excavating soil. They removed the tanks. They pumped out the remaining oil into storage facilities. They're going to be disposing of soils off property, and no one's in the residence right now. So that site is in compliance at this point in time, and I would say that it seems like they're doing everything adequately and in accordance with the regulations. So that's my little report on the status of the 2 oil disposal sites that we have in town.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Lisa. Can I ask a totally rookie question? So
Yeah.
in terms of the oversight of this, is this all under DEP? Like, how does that process
No,
work?
we're a privatized system in Massachusetts. So basically DEP issues the administrative pieces, but everything is done under the direction of a licensed site professional like myself. And so DEP only tends to get involved if someone is not meeting their deadlines and obligations, or if they audit something and they believe it's not being done in accordance with the regulations. So for the Lake Street site, DEP did say, this is an immediate response action situation. So you need to submit a plan to DEP about what you've done so far, what you're planning to do, and they do look at those. Those are called IRA plans, or immediate response actions. And like I said, for the Lake Street site, they did do the plan when they were supposed to and provided, I think, adequate status. I didn't see anything that looked like a glaring omission. So usually DEP doesn't get involved unless there's a violation, and so, at 127 Oldfield, that could end up being the case unless they get their act together and actually hire an LSP and, assess the extent of the issue. It could be a really minor issue and easy to clean up and not a big deal. I mean, that's my hope and that's my impression, but there's so little information. I just can't evaluate it at this juncture. So it's really up to the LSP.
Super
I have
helpful.
a couple questions. Did you say that 120 days has passed for the Oldfield site already?
So 120 days, yeah, the release was actually in March.
Oh,
They did finally, I think probably because DEP was like, hey, the 100, you gave us like an indication that something happened in March, and you didn't file the official release notification form to DEP within 120 days, which would have been in August, but then they did file it in September. So it was late, but they finally gave the 120-day release notification form. However, DEP issued what's known as a notice of responsibility to this person who I guess is the performing party, saying like, okay, now you need to hire an LSP, you need to do this work, and you need to either close it out within a year of the notification date, or do additional reporting into your classification.
okay.
So.
All right. And then on Lake Street, do they say how often they're taking some sort of samples or analyzing the monitoring wells between the release and the pond?
I think they only did it at the time, when they installed the monitoring well. So as far as I am aware, they've only been sampled one time. However, it does appear that if anything, they've done a lot of removal of the potential source. So I would say the chance for, you know, they will be resampling those wells. They're installed as monitoring wells, Daryl. So they will be doing resampling. And when they think they're done, they absolutely are going to need to keep, you know, sampling them for at least a couple quarters to confirm that there's been no sort of slow seep of things, maybe between, you know, the time period when they started, when the release happened and the cleanup happened. But
I hope it's slow seep since it's sand.
I would say it looks like they're doing, you know, things correctly. You know,
Okay.
like I said, I didn't see anything that looked like, you know, that doesn't make sense, or I have a significant concern about what they're doing and what they're proposing to do. But they'll be issuing a status report, I think in another 60 days from September. So I think there'll be a status or is it 90 days? So I always forget like what the staggered. I know they did the plan within the 60 days so
Yeah.
that they were in compliance, but they should be issuing a status report soon and or a completion report if they feel they're done. But like I said, I would definitely expect to see at least another 1 to 2 rounds of monitoring of those wells to make sure that they stay clean.
Okay. And I've certainly seen trucks there
Yeah.
on a number of occasions.
Awesome. Thanks, Lisa.
Sure.
Daryl, do you want to do a brief discussion for the, I think, were you and Mark able to do the Washington Street walkthrough for the 40B section? I can't totally keep track of what thing happened when and whether it happened or didn't happen.
Yes. So we were both there, and Lisa was there as well. Is there
I had to
anybody
leave
else
a
from
little
board?
early, though. Yeah, I think it was us and
There
Mark.
were, yeah,
Yeah.
okay. So maybe you want to talk about it for a moment, and then I'll fill in on kind of what the next steps are. The fun admin side.
I mean, it was very general. They just literally took us on a very cursory walk in the woods about roughly where they were talking about maybe having the building and the septic, and they gave us the plan that had, you know, very conceptual schematics, but they have zero details at this particular point in time about the construction type. You know, I asked, is this going to be slab on grade, and what are you going to do about ledge? And they said, oh, we haven't even gone that far. What are you talking about? There's no ledge here. And I laughed at that because there's clearly some outcrops of bedrock in the woods there, maybe not where they're putting the building, however. So it was just a very cursory walk. And, you know, he talked a little bit about, you know, the goal to have it be very green and like, you know, net zero carbon impact and solar over the parking area. There just were very few details about how many parking spots, you know, where's this going to go? How deep is this going to be? You know, they just don't have a lot of, I would say, the nitty gritty information that we would care about at this point. And they did have the gentleman from Massachusetts Housing speak, because this is proposed to be low income housing, not necessarily just, you know, in a quarter affordable units, but actually lower income. So it's even a lower threshold, which, you know, I think a lot of us would support and, you know, want to have better diversity in our town. But there's just a lot of ambiguity, I would say, at this juncture about, you know, he talked about potentially relocating the Bailey Trail, you know, avoiding, you know, impacts to the vernal pools, but you know, the devil's in the details, and we don't have any of it right now.
I'll also mention that they're planning a public water supply, because this would be rental units. So therefore, I don't believe with rental units, like we've seen with the fields at Sherborn, which even though they eventually went to a public water supply for other reasons, probably well, anyway, I won't speculate on that. So where they wouldn't be able to divide up ownership of the wells to make them covering less than 25 people per day and assign them to only a portion, because these won't be owned units, they'll be rental units. So that's the good news, in that if it goes ahead and there are uncertainties, there's a chance with some routine monitoring to identify if things happen. Of course, once they happen, they're too late. It's all in there, and that's not great. But those are some of the details that we'll need to look at. And then Mark has been been out there observing soil testing. And I don't know, have they finished the testing that they were planning there, Mark, or not yet?
Yes, actually, the day we took the walk of the site, they had finished it the week before.
Okay.
For the front part. Now, Greenwood Street, we just were out there up till Monday of this week, but we're out there last Thursday, Friday, and this Monday doing the testing there as well. So that whole location has been tested at this point for soil testing.
Perfect. And I see Rebecca's hand up, so we'll do Rebecca and then Jeff.
Part with the public water supply, as we know, is the sort of lack of ability to fix the problem if there is a problem identified. But we can anticipate that there might be a problem. Is there a way that the board could introduce some precautions that might obviate those problems?
Wait, I'm
The
confused.
EHIR.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to make sure I understand, Rebecca. So, you know, any public water supply, obviously there's going to be monitoring that's mandated by the state. They're going to have to meet all the potability regulations, you know, in Massachusetts, et cetera. So are you talking about impacts to abutters, or I guess I just want to make sure I understand. What is it?
It doesn't matter. I mean, individual residents, abutters, any of those people, none of them have, even with a public water supply, the only recourse they have is litigation. But we, the board, understand the implications if a problem takes place, and we might be able to take some precautions prior to the construction of something that has rental units in it. You know, at what point are
Do you have a specific that you can suggest?
Well, I think
Would like
you
to
know what
suggest?
I think the EHIR should be done in advance, and that we might be able to make some requests that are that precede the construction, because we know that right now or I should say, we know the value of finding information out in advance, because that is a preventive approach to minimize later consequences, you know, complications, problems, litigation, whatever.
And so, as you know, we argued vigorously for the fields at Sherborn. You're the only other current board member who was also there for all of that. And we did end up getting it, not because it would have necessarily been backed up by the authorities for 40B, right? Because they can waive local regulations. But I think that one was precipitated more by the neighboring group who got together and hired a consultant who did a certain type of analysis, which then precipitated the project proponent doing that analysis as well. And then the town hired someone who did confirmatory evaluations of that. And the peer reviewer also weighed in. So we ended up getting the EHIR more because it was pushed by another group doing it. But in all of the letters, when we write on these projects, all of them, we have advocated for the EHIR, and that requirement be backed up somehow by the housing authorities in Massachusetts. But
Right.
It's uncertain, and the ZBA has also worked to support that kind of evaluation as well, but there's no guarantee of it. But we do, every single letter, every project has had that emphasized.
Right.
Doesn't
But
always
I
work.
did speak to the one of the attorneys in the regulatory department of DHCD, and they actually think it's a good idea to make sure that drinking water is safe in affordable housing of all types. And so,
And
I-
until
even though
DEP can
they-
get housing to support us on that, that'd be great.
Well,
But right now,
Wait,
it's not
no,
a good
wait,
time.
I would also just say, like, I think we can't, like, it's a public water supply. So I don't think we can say that our untested well water is substantially safer than a regularly tested public water supply.
Yeah, yeah.
And so what I would say is,
think,
like,
yeah.
this is a public water supply. I think it will have some of the, whether or not one is enthusiastic about the project is separate. Like, it being a public water supply does provide projections and an ability to monitor and evaluate it. And that is the
Oh, yeah.
standard
No,
for
that's great.
Massachusetts. So I think that's covered. I do
Um,
think,
I wouldn't call, I view testing that happens with the public water supply, not as a protect. It's a protection of sorts, but it's not a true protection. It's not preventing the contamination of the water, and that's the issue. It is
Right, because-
alerting people if there is contamination so that then you can take action to treat the water so that it's a drinking water quality. But on a sustainability level, that's not the approach. It's a lot more resources. You have to dump the contaminated portion somewhere or whatever you're extracting.
I think we have to be careful if we sort of are implying, oh, you know, by doing X, Y, or Z, it is less safe. I don't think that's something, like, again, I think your point of prevent, like, an ounce of prevention is a pound of cure, totally agree. And making sure that the project doesn't contaminate local resources, either for its own residents or butters, makes a ton of sense. I just want to be cautious as a board to say, hey, a public water supply isn't a safe water supply, doesn't feel like a message we should be propagating, even if we
Oh,
say,
that's,
Oh, yeah. No,
Yeah.
that's my point, though, is that it's not, having the ability to test doesn't protect anything.
Wait,
but
wait, wait.
having
I totally
Can I just
disagree.
finish my sentence? I just want to say one thing. It's short. Objective data is helpful for us. We have very little objective data. If we required the EHIR before rather than after it is declared a public water supply, we have the only objective of data available with which to make decisions. And that's the only way it can be preventive. Otherwise, it's reactive.
so I think we'll definitely provide the recommendation to, so one, I think, Jeff, does this all fall under ZBA? And so we will provide the recommendation to ZBA that they include an EHIR, and I think that's pretty standard for us and would be standard for here as well. I see Jeff's hand up as well. So Jeff, do you want to take the floor and then we can kind of close out this piece of the discussion with the board?
Yeah, I'll be quick, Matt. Thank you. Weighing in on timing. So we submitted the letter to Mass Housing last week, December 3rd, on the 4 homes on Greenwood. So that reflected your input, and that will probably, follow up with a comprehensive permit ZBA process when that comes back to us, whenever that is. What I wanted to mention about the one we're talking about tonight, which is it's Washington Street. I think they're calling it Sherborn Homes also, is how they're referring to it for some reason.
Jeff, I was,
The due date was December 23rd, and this isn't, as you indicated in the discussion, this isn't a response to Mass Housing. This goes to Massachusetts HCD. And the guy's name, a really nice guy, came out, Franklin Miller, who represented them. So the due date is December 23rd. So we submitted early last week, a request for a 30-day extension for comments from all our boards and committees, which would be January 23rd. Subsequent to that, Lynn Sweet, the consultant to the developer, submitted a letter also to DHCD saying that 30 days was too much of an extension and they would only accept a 15-day extension. They didn't think it was necessary. And so then today, I believe, or yesterday, Mary and I had drafted a note back to them, say, no, we think 30 days is necessary, and this is why, particularly with the holidays. And, you know, the site visit was actually scheduled pretty late, well after the first notice. So we don't know yet. My bottom line is we don't know if we're going to get a 30-day extension. Well, we might get a 0 extension if they don't give us anything, but or if they'll honor our 30-day or the developer's 15-day. So we're waiting to hear on that in terms of when we'd have to have comments back. 15 days, I think, would be whatever that is, you know, January 8th or something like that. So we'll just have to see where that ends up. But I just wanted to give you a heads up on the timing. If we get the full 30 days, which I'm optimistic we will, that would be January 23rd, we'd need the comments in. And as Lisa pointed out, you know, there's almost no data. So it's really going to be hard to comment other than sort of platitudes.
So
Thanks.
I have to say, after we received the message from, I forget who sent it out on behalf of the select board about the timing, maybe it was Jeannie Guthrie. I assume we're just going to have something drafted before our next meeting in the event that there is no extension at all, our next Board of Health meeting. I don't know what other people think, but.
When is that meeting, Daryl?
21st.
The 21st of December?
Yep.
Yes.
Oh, no, I think you'll be all right. I mean, it's the 23rd if we had to do it. You might have to have it drafted by then, but I'm pretty confident we'll get some extensions because we got a 30-day extension for the Greenwood homes of just 4 homes. And this is a much more complex project, admittedly with no data, but you know, it's sort of hard to tell because the other extension came from Mass Housing, not from Mass HCD.
Okay. Daryl, would you be comfortable? I hate to put you on the spot, and yet I am. Would you be comfortable adapting and tailoring some of the previous communications that you've worked on for those elements that are overlap and are sort of general to the town of Sherborn from the other 40Bs that have recently come across our proverbial desk?
I was rather expecting that. So,
well, much appreciated nonetheless.
So anyone can come and dust my house anytime you're available. But so yes,
There's not 2 of us at once.
And I welcome what?
I said 2 of us can't come dust your house. Yeah. Otherwise, we have to invite the whole town.
So, well, I'll take one. So anyway, yes, I can pull something together, and then I welcome comments on, you know, high points that what people are thinking about. I'd like to say, though, just as a minor thing on what we're just talking about, I don't view the EHIR as driven by the public water supply or a private water supply. It's just driven by quality impacts to the water resource. So it doesn't have to come before or after any decision along those lines. It's just about understanding what is going to be done to the water, which is actually a state level issue for groundwater discharge, is understanding that. If it was development of, if it wasn't for the fact that it's a 40B, and if it was a larger project, they do all sorts of studies to look at what travel time are of contaminants between the discharge area and water supplies. And that's a big deal for that kind of evaluation. And because these are smaller projects and we govern it, and it's just an important thing to do. So, but any other comments people want to toss in about this? Very welcome to do so, although how would that happen? Because it can't be all of us.
Well, what I would say, Joe, is why don't, if you want to,
unless you say it now, anything now.
Well, or I'd say, like, I think that in the near absence of any specific details for the site, that sort of content is most likely to be the things we previously considered. And
Yeah.
so I think we can say, that's certainly a working version. We can have a placeholder on the 21st agenda in case we don't get an extension to say, Marion and Jeff, yep, the same thing as last time, which I suspect we'll need to communicate to them before the 21st in that case. But it at least then gives us some opportunity for any tweaks or adjustments in the short period before the submission on the 23rd, should we fail to get an extension. But again, I think if we don't have any site-specific details, it's not clear to me how much more specific we can make the response compared to our previous responses.
Right. So this is not unlike the fields in a way, in that there are extensive wetlands near to the Washington Street property. And the presence of the wetlands gives some indication about what groundwater levels might be. So one can assume that they're not, assume that they're not so, the groundwater is not terribly deep beneath this property. So,
and do we know anything about what their waste treatment plan is? Like, are they planning a wastewater treatment plant like they've had?
no, they're not. They're coming in under the 10,000 gallons. So it's really the ownership of the wells that's driving the PWS, I think.
Okay, perfect.
I'm speculating on that. I mean, and then our EHIR. And Mark, would any system, because of the size, a Title V system, be required to do a mounding analysis? We don't do that for single family homes, but is there a driver other than our EHIR for?
I believe it's over 2,000 gallons. So we were
Okay.
talking about the fact that when I was out there with the engineer, he is planning to do that groundwater mounding.
Yeah.
Okay. Perfect. All right. So I know, I think a rich discussion. I really appreciate everybody's input. I just want to be cognizant of the other topics on, including revisiting the well regulation. So
Yeah.
if it's okay with folks, I'd love to close the book on this one for now, although we'll plan to include on the 12/21 meeting. Does that sound okay?
Yeah.
Yep.
Perfect. So I think, one other comment I would add in the context of the Chair's Business number 5 posting on Nextdoor is I did recirculate to the group the guidance we got from the town in terms of any communication about business before the board or board topics really should not come from us. If folks can please review the town social media policy, which I re-forwarded to the members of the board earlier today, and which Ellen had sent out in mid-September when it was circulated, as well as the guidance from town council in that regard. So again, I think that in generally not appropriate for us to comment on topics that are issues before the board or that may be before the board and can pose issues with both the open meeting law and the preservation of public records that are important. Joe, I don't know if you have anything else to add to that.
I was confused and concerned by what I read. I didn't read all of it, but a little bit, that talked about the Board of Health should have something like regulations for projects other than a single family home on a single lot, and we do. And I wasn't sure why there was that comment about not having it.
So what I would say, I hear that.
Oh, and I guess, sorry, let me just finish that thought. Is my concern is that information was out there. I believe it was posted by a board member, and it doesn't reflect section 3 or part 3 of our regulations, which is all about that. So I don't know if we need to then address that.
I don't think so, because what I would say is, I think this is the intent of the communication of the social media policy to say this shouldn't even be a question, because if we address it, then it further clouds whether this is deliberation or other pieces that are not compatible. And I think the intent is to say, if it's here, it should be talked about in a public meeting that's posted, and social media is not an appropriate venue for it. I think additionally, the thing I would say is that for all of these projects, the there is not a set of local regulations that would then change it. My understanding of the intent of the 40B process is to say we are intending to increase access to affordable housing in Massachusetts, and as such are looking to state regulations in an expedited process to work those projects through. So from a practical standpoint, were that to be one's goal, I don't think that additional local regulatory intervention would change how that state-based process would unfold. Independent of that, I think it's important that we don't do things that either could violate or could be perceived to violate either open meeting law or the retention of public records. And then Rebecca.
Okay, so then I guess then I'll say it here. And I didn't read everything, so I have to confess. So maybe that point was explained, because I thought that was maybe the distinction that would have needed to be made, is that we have those regulations. However, in the case of 40Bs, it is not a guarantee that we will be able to implement them. And I think so. The board has not neglected this whole subset of projects in town.
And then Rebecca, I see you've got your hand up. Go ahead.
You're muted. You're muted.
Thank you. I think you do understand that there is a loophole where the protections are not in our regulations yet for multi-family units and shared wells when more than one, when setback requirements can't be met. And that is something that we have discussed before. And it is tricky. I mean, we have to figure it out, and it's not easy. And unfortunately, because they're private wells, and for example, if 4 houses go in on that lot, it'll be very difficult for, in the absence of litigation, for those residents to protect their own interests. And I think the Board of Health should take on the challenge of trying to find a way to protect the individual rights of those residents, because we don't have DEP to regulate. And this is not an easy conversation, but it is true that we know that this exists, and we are in the process of updating the regs, but we're also doing it in a very, once those permits are in, whatever exists in the current regs are what apply. And I think you understand.
Well, no, even now it applies. Like, you certainly couldn't introduce a regulation for a submitted project,
right,
and have it apply. So I don't, again, I think it's a mischaracterization to say that regulations don't exist, because they do exist. And I think we've talked about that, and I'm not interested in adjudicating that more tonight.
Regulations that don't apply exist. Absolutely. You are correct.
But
regulations don't apply to that circumstance. So that doesn't protect.
But Rebecca, I would also say, literally, we've had this conversation about 10 times.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you to let me finish my sentence as well. For the 40B process, none of those regulations will matter. So again, we have spent an enormous amount of time and energy thinking about how to work on the regs. And so with that, we can probably close this topic out and go to the well regulation discussion. I guess the thing I find,
when you're done.
Certainly. I think the thing that I'm going to share my frustration with is that it is common for you to say the board doesn't do this and the board should do this. And I think that it's inaccurate. I think that's part of why the social media policy exists, because it's not appropriate to have that venue either on Nextdoor or in these comments where you say, boy, the board should do this and the board shouldn't do that. And it's often inaccurate. And at least for me personally, a source of some frustration as we spend a lot of time and energy to try to manage the regulations, to revise the regulations. And certainly if you would like to contribute language to those revisions, that would be most welcome. I would ask that you not post on Nextdoor what you think people should do or should not do, particularly when that information may be inaccurate, because when you're doing that, you're doing it as an agent of the town. You're not doing it as Dr. Honeywell individual. And I think that's an important distinction, that in those capacities, you're speaking as a member of the board and an agent of the town. And so that's really the mindset that I think would need to be taken for the postings that you're doing on topics that relate to the work of the board.
Are you done? I don't want to talk over you. So it actually is true that there are some attorneys at the state level, including at the Department of Housing and Community Development, who are concerned about protecting drinking water in affordable housing. And it's also true that the Board of Health is the only entity that has the authority to regulate health regulations. And it is also, we have to balance the need for housing with the need to protect the drinking water in that housing. And there are discussions happening at the state level that have not been implemented yet, where every well will be regulated by DEP, but because it hasn't changed, we have the burden of enforcing regulations. But because I don't think a public water supply is beneficial, except that there's recourse for the individuals affected. For example, Flint, Michigan, those residents were protected by statute, so the entity in charge had to do something. But we, the town Board of Health, don't have any state backup, and so we have the difficult situation of trying to figure out how in advance we can protect the drinking water 10 years from now. And that's where our abilities are limited. But we know that those risks exist, and many people are not aware of the fact that they're not protected by statute with a private well. And the other thing is that 10 years from now, somebody living in that affordable unit might not have the resources to protect their interests, and no one wants to sue the town. So all I'm asking is that we acknowledge the fact that we need to protect every single well, every single drinking water supply, in where, regardless of what the circumstances are, and we need to do everything we possibly can in advance to protect the interests of the individuals. And that's our responsibility as a board. So it's unfair and unfortunate that your characterization is that I criticize the board. That's not true. We've known about this problem for years. We know that our regs only apply to single family homes on single lots. The manner in which
Wrong.
we protect those.
That's not true,
resources.
Rebecca. We need to stop.
Excuse
No.
me. Excuse me, let me finish my sentence. Our
So-
setbacks are the way that we protect drinking water, but we can't have setbacks in multi-unit development. So we've got to figure out how to solve that.
40B is totally different, Rebecca. We've talked about this so many
I
times.
know you think that's true. But
No, it's actually part of the 40B statute. It's not an opinion.
I
It's a
understand
fact.
what you're saying, but you
No,
don't.
I don't think you do.
I do.
I
Actually.
don't think you do, but Matt, let's just stop.
I would like to close the
I-
topic. So
Very
Rebecca,
good friends with people at the state level
but
who
then Rebecca, follow it up.
are aware of this situation.
So Rebecca, I totally hear your understanding. It has been consistent. I believe it's factually incorrect. I don't want to adjudicate that further tonight. With that, I'd like to close the discussion on the Board of Health postings on Nextdoor, but would like to reinforce that as members of the Board of Health, we should not be posting on Nextdoor about topics before us. It is not appropriate. It is not compliant with the town policy. I think if folks have not reviewed that, please plan to do so. And with that, we'll segue to the discussion of well regulations, as has been reflected in the minutes of November 16th, 2nd, October 5th, September 21st, September 7th, July 20th, June 1st, May 18th, May 4th, and April 6th, to speak to the fact that the board, in fact, has spent an inordinate amount of time and energy in thinking about our well and water supply regulations. With that, Daryl, I will pass the baton to you.
Okay, are you seeing something's looking a little funky about my screen here?
It's a little small, Daryl, like if you can make it take up the whole space. Yeah.
And Daryl, I just want to confirm this one and the track changes has your comments, but not town council comments, correct?
Correct.
Perfect.
All right, so are you seeing, is that good size? All right.
Yep.
Also, I figured that other things might run long, so I just am narrowing this down to what I think is a really complicated topic. And Lisa, again, I think was maybe Rebecca and Lisa were present at the last time that the board discussed some of the changes that are included here that I'll get to in just a minute. And I think we had, besides many, many meetings to discuss it, when we got to the public hearing, we spent hours on one topic. And so I don't imagine that we're going to maybe finish that today. But let's see. We've gone over some of this already, but what we really hadn't gotten up to, we did talk about disinfection and decontamination.
Daryl, this is the one where you put your red line on top of my red line, right?
Yes, I merged them, and then I found a way to avoid some redundancy in language. So I wove in what you had and then streamlined it a bit, but I believe I captured everything that you had. So, so this is what we'll focus on. There's the sampling quality. And Mark, this first one on collected by a well management professional approved by the Board of Health. Does that make sense to you for water samples that get taken?
Yeah, it's difficult. It's vague. Not this here, but just the whole process of water collection. Most of the time we do get the chain of custody report on who took the sample, but I believe it would be in our best interest to make sure it's a well management professional as noted versus having maybe the applicant collect the sample.
Right, because on collecting volatile samples, for example, there are protocols for doing that.
Yes.
It could be a qualified environmental professional too. I mean, we know how to do that. I'm not a
okay, so, and that could be a question whether we just have a professional approved by the Board of Health. It could be a lab tech. They sometimes do
there's
testing.
lots of people who can competently collect a water sample. DEP has even done it, as we know, right?
Yeah.
So we don't want to be too specific, I think. And do we typically approve them, Daryl? Like, do they say?
No, we don't typically approve them. This would be something different to ensure that the samples are being collected properly. So we're getting an appropriate.
So are we approving the person or are we approving the protocol? Like, I don't know if we should get involved in approving the person. That seems, I don't know.
I know. I think it would be hard. That's why.
Yeah, I don't actually
question.
like that. Yeah, qualified professional, or there is a definition of like a qualified environmental professional.
Okay.
And I think that would include lab tech, that would include, people who are doing the installation and the potability testing. So
I would even say maybe just qualified professional, because.
Okay. But I don't want to have to deal with us approving people because I don't think that's we don't want to, just say that. Right.
Is there a way we can exclude the person of interest, such as the applicant or the owner?
I mean.
Oh, if they happen to be a qualified professional?
Yeah, I just see a little conflict there, but again, and we never had control on this before, but never mind the concern they may not know how to properly take the sample as well, but I don't know if we can legally put.
Should we just
if it's a qualified professional, I feel like it sort of covers it. Like if Lisa was saying,
if I took a sample in my
own sample,
well,
she's like, I would rather take a sample than pay somebody to take a sample.
I think it's right. I think it's more what we want to get to, Daryl, is that they use established protocols.
Yeah.
That they're doing it right. That's what we care about. I don't really care, what the person's title is as much as that they're using, established protocols for collection of, drinking water samples. That's really what we care about, is that they're doing it right. Right. So.
Yeah. Okay, I'll leave that for now. We could
Okay, yeah, we can,
anything more. That
yeah.
was the easy part of all this.
I'm- I don't like us referring to the methods for, you know, things, because methods change. Like, for example, the PFAS methods, they're changing all the time. We don't want to have to deal with changing our regulations every time you know, an analytical method is done. So we can either give them as example or just say using, you know, EPA approved analytical methods.
Okay.
Something like that.
EPA or state, and I agree with that.
EPA or
'Cause
state.
actually, I know that this method EPA 524 was in there previously. You added this one, so I thought you were reinforcing.
Well, that I started to think about it, and I
Yeah.
was,
No, anything that, because they're already looking at new methods for PFAS. So they're
Yeah,
coming
well,
up with
and that- well, there's-
variations
right,
as we speak.
right. There's
So-
multiple methods already too, and some of them are comparable. So I would just say, chemical analysis shall be performed. Chemical and physical analysis. How about using EPA or state analytical methods or something, like right at the beginning? So
All right.
EPA or state methods. Well, actually, because physical analysis isn't necessarily analytical. So do we want to say using, we can take out the word analytical because we already have chemical
Okay.
analysis and just say state methods. Yeah, that's good. And that way we can just get rid of the reference to any specifics.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, I like that. That's good.
All right. And then I'll get rid of those references.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay. Okay. All right. And then we added arsenic and lead. And this, I'd almost rather not, personally rather not have any of these numbers in there, except that we have the sodium one that's unique, you know, and keep it to anything that's unique to Sherborn, and the rest refer, but maybe we do need to identify the things that we want tested.
Well, but they're going to keep changing too. Like we said, we want VOCs and PFAS, and we're not listing them. I think these are good to list because they're not actually MCLs. Most of them, they're secondary.
Right. Yeah.
So I think that's fine, but both arsenic and lead are actually MCLs. They're not secondary standards. So I don't think we need to put them in. Who knows, the lead number might go down because the CDC, you know, and ATSDR recommendations for blood lead levels have gone down.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's a treatability standard right now. So I don't know. I'm kind of ambivalent. They'll probably take a long time to change. So it's not like with PFAS where it changes like weekly. But you know, I guess I'm sort of ambivalent on whether we need to put those in or not, because we're saying they have to meet the MMCLs. So we could add for select metals, VOCs, and PFAS, or we can just keep it the way it is. I'm okay either way, I think.
I guess it just affects how much we might need to make revisions and keep on top of that.
I mean, they haven't changed in over a decade. It's not like PFAS. Actually, it's been more like 20 years. So I don't think that arsenic and lead or any of these are going to change anytime soon. Whereas for VOCs and PFAS, it's a much more variable situation.
Yeah. Okay.
No, I'm okay leaving it the way you have it right now. I think that's okay.
Okay. And I mean, we have had these specified all along.
Yep.
All right. So here's the one that gets more complicated. So we've got now
the reference. Yep.
Right. What you suggested, which previously we had really a zero tolerance for VOCs. And why? And here, if they are detected, before it was any, if volatiles were ever detected, they had to come out or couldn't be.
I mean, you know,
so
right. I think it gets tricky with the whole decontamination, and I think it just we can discuss as a board if we want to say VOCs need to be 0. That's one thing. PFAS, we can't say that because there's background concentration. So and those are, you know, somewhat contemplated in the soil and water standards, and there'll be more on that down the road, but that's because they're in consumer products and our septic systems as well.
Right.
You know, so that PFAS is its own little universe there. I just thought it made sense if we were going to rely on the state numbers. It leaves us no vulnerability because we're relying on state levels and we're not being more, you know, or less stringent. We're being equivalent. We can certainly choose to say 0 for VOCs if we feel that that's something that we see as, you know, an ongoing issue. But the only problem then gets to if you did a decon, and we've had to deal with that at least once since I've been on the board.
Right. So we don't see many hits of VOCs in well testing. And when they have been found, they've often been tied to the well installation, and then the issues resolve themselves through some flushing.
Right.
So whoever did this long ago with the Sherborn regulations just said that it would be 0, which, as somebody has pointed out, a lab expert who's on the call tonight, that even if we were going to keep it where it is, we should not have 0. We should just have not detected, which is what it says down below is, you know, if it's detected at all.
Yeah.
I'm uncomfortable with saying let's change to the state levels, which are higher, certainly significantly higher, because that is geared for systems that are testing regularly. So by calling out VOCs now, it highlights to people, if they are present, that they really shouldn't be there under normal circumstances, and different than PFAS.
I'm okay with that. If we want to change it to detectable, then, you know, that takes care of, you can't say 0 because nothing's 0. Detection limits aren't 0. And then just I think that's that I'm okay with that. Yeah, I'm just remembering the meetings that we had a few years ago when people were kind of very concerned about us going beyond what the state requires, and it's like, is it setting up 2 classes? And, you know, there's obviously risk and health that are contemplated, as well as monetary considerations. It's a cost benefit analysis to set MCLs. So from a public health perspective, I'm okay with us for the VOCs if we wanted to say shall not be detectable, but keep the PFAS referencing the state regs, because like I said, there are definitely background contributions from our own bodies and septic systems, and that is different than the VOC. So I think the only thing we need to contemplate is the line for the decontamination and disinfection issues, just to make sure that we certainly want people to make sure that they're not drinking bacteria. So, you know, we just need to, I guess, figure out how do we sort of deal with that at the same time that we're saying you can't have any VOCs detected.
So just for people who weren't at the hearing, whatever it was, 5 or so years ago, 6 years ago, and I'll just talk about VOC. So the standards set by EPA or the state, as Lisa just mentioned, take into consideration not only health effects, but the costs of having to comply with a certain level, certain quality reached. Then there's a separate thing that the EPA does, and it's called the standard is a goal, and it's based strictly on health. So if you go through the list of all the VOCs and you look at the goals, sometimes you'll see that the goal is the same as the standard is for the VOC now, or it can be half. There are a few cases where 0 is the health goal for certain contaminants. So, you know, that would be another metric to peg against, or whether we give any wiggle room, say 10% of the EPA or state level, acceptable level, to give that wiggle room for, again, here this reference to decon, whether there's a residual from chlorination, which is a requirement now, which I think is a little nuts, but anyway, that can introduce these VOCs into the water sampling, which might then clear itself out over time, but be a headache in the short term in terms of putting in a whole house treatment system. So it gets very tricky, like which number do you pick? And the other thing to note is that right now we have 0. It's well established in town. And we could probably go up from here, but we couldn't return to non-detect probably if we bumped it up at some point in the future, unless there was really compelling information at that time.
Yeah, I mean, I think
Can I please make a
non-detect is
statement?
multiple of 0, though. We can't say 0 because that's not an achievable.
Right.
Can I
Via.
make a statement, please?
Go ahead.
I think one of the problems with VOCs is that, as you know, the risks to humans exist more in aerosolized VOCs than in consumed VOCs. So the problem is when people are showering.
No, that's just not completely accurate. It's both pathways. I did my whole thesis on cardiac malformations from ingestion of TCE and drinking water. So it's really both. It's
right.
both.
But I think that I don't know, correct me then, because you know much more than I do. My understanding is that you don't need as much when it's aerosolized, so that the risks are easier to be of concerning level, or I should say, the potential risks are greater at a lower level if it's getting aerosolized, which could potentially happen when people shower.
Yeah, it's not a simple like rule of thumb, Rebecca. So there's different values that are based on how much in terms of toxicity, for example, for TCE in air as a vapor, it's you know, a different number than the level that in water, but there's also different exposure intensity. There's different duration. People are obviously, you know, drinking water every single day. You're not necessarily, showering every day. Sometimes maybe you're taking a bath, or maybe you're going someplace else. So there's, and the amount of time you're in the shower is obviously, you know, usually pretty short. So that's a whole other discussion that like, I don't think we want to get into. I think the bottom line is, you know, this we just threw in as sort of a placeholder for discussion. I guess, you know, I do think, Daryl, it probably does make sense to be more conservative with the VOCs. It hasn't really seemed to be an issue in town to have non-detectable levels. So I just, you know, I think tying it, you know, saying something like, you know, shall not be detected via analytical methods or something along those lines, or Tom, maybe you have a good, you know, wording for that, and then just leave for the PFAS to keep it tied to the state level, since we know we have a contribution in a town like ours from septic, as well as, you know, just air deposition over time, and, you know, from all kinds of sources, and in the rain and blah, blah, blah. So I'm open to modifying it along the lines to non-detect, as long as we can still encourage people to make sure they don't have bacteria in their water. And I know Tom's had his hand up a really long time.
So Tom?
Can I talk?
Yeah.
You guys are opening up some big cans of worms, and if you could go back to the MMCL paragraph, I actually like that paragraph, and I would just like to mention, and maybe like to have one-on-one conversations with a couple of you, because I don't want to take up your time here, but please don't ever say zero. You know, as an analytical chemist, we reject that. There's no such thing as zero. And why you seem to be talking past your paragraph there. I like just sticking with the state regulations, going with their MCLs. They've looked at the analytical methods, they've looked at the health effects, and they've set those. You know, the methods are always going to keep getting more sensitive. The quantitation limits are going to keep dropping. You're going to open up a can of worms if you say, you know, you can't have a detectable volatile. You know, the state public water supplies have detectable volatiles, but if they're below the MCLs, it's considered potable water. So.
Okay, so I don't know if you were following what we've discussed in the past. One is we already have non-detectable in the regulations, so we're not opening up a can of worms on that respect. The other is, again, for public water supplies, they're testing all the time, so they know if they're getting close to the limit. Whereas, I mean, people can test their home waters all the time, but they may not be as aware or thinking about how groundwater is always moving and our plumes moving. And as if we're finding something in Sherborn, it's anomalous because, again, it has very rarely been detected and has even more rarely been something that requires treatment because it couldn't be eliminated. And those instances that I can think of in town were tied to known releases of solvents. So, and I don't know if you're familiar with the MCLGs of EPA. If you go on their website and look for the contaminant level goals. No, I mean Tom in particular, but
yeah, but I don't want to put those on
health effects, and it's all about. Sometimes I think the Board of Health is trying to set things up. This is maybe the one time that people are going to do the water test, and so we're trying to alert them. So
yeah, I definitely do not want to start referencing MCLGs, and a lot of times that's antiquated language. They're not standards. They're recommendations.
They're goals.
They're goals. And many of them were in the Wayback Machine listed as 0. So getting back to Tom's concern, I don't want to reference MCLGs at all. And also, you know, like they're based on toxicity data at that time. Not often, but sometimes we find out that things are actually less toxic than we thought. So I would refrain from referencing them at all. And I think, you know, let's why don't we move on a little bit and get to disinfection stuff, and then we can, you know, ponder for the VOCs if we should leave it as it is or if we should.
So back to the one thing, the reason I mentioned the MCLG, not because I'd want to use it, because I think that it's too complicated. There are too many to look at, which is why the percent. The last round of big discussions we had was, would we pick half of the MCL or 25% or 10%, or, you know, what would it be if it was a different level? but not all the way up to the MCL. The MCLGs I only bring up because when there's discussion of it's a safe level has been established, that's a safe level factoring in costs. So it's a different concept than I think what we're purely talking about here. So, all right. So we'll work on something. We will not ever have zero, and we'll refer to detection limits more. Okay. I didn't know if we wanted to have something depending on what kind of disinfection or decontamination was performed, whether there would be additional parameters that need to be tested for to ensure that they didn't overdo either the procedure and the use of chemical, and whether it was cleared out. Or did we think that we're covered now by the VOCs for most of the disinfection, decontamination products that might be used? And Mark, that might be something that you're more familiar with.
Yeah, well, the well drillers in the past have indicated when we've seen chlorinated compounds that it was most likely caused through the decontamination process with the use of chlorine. But they won't put it in writing. So we've always been in a dilemma on if it was caused by the chlorination process or is it being drawn from somewhere else. But very difficult to get the person that needs to sign off stating it might have been that situation to do that. So we've always been in that dilemma. And what has worked is flushing out the water to make sure it is coming from the actual drilling process, not from, say, the environment.
All right. Do you think, given the way that this part is written anyway, just saying other parameters shall be evaluated on a case-by-case basis, I don't know if we've ever actually acted on that, but maybe we wouldn't even need this statement.
Yeah, actually, many years ago, what I just mentioned earlier about the well driller stating that, we did have a meeting on that, and it just went back to the process of flushing out the well and proving it was erroneous or introduced. So, but we haven't had that need in the past several years to have the board review a certain well.
And in a way, this says if we knew that they did disinfection, we might be able to request that they test for different products.
Yeah.
So I don't know, what do people think? Do we just not even need that kind of addition?
You mean because we're capturing it by saying like if there's
It just says other, it's pretty loose.
Yeah, I think that might be better, to be honest. So, because who knows, and maybe there'll be some funky new thing that people will use too. Like, I don't know.
Right.
Why would you? I'm more conservative.
Well, it's still giving us it's still saying we have the right to do it on a case by case for anything else. So it's an inclusive exception.
Why would you want to remove it though?
I think the goal is to make it more.
We're removing the specifics related to the disinfection by saying.
I think we're also not removing anything. We're not adding it.
Right.
Yeah.
We're not. Yeah, exactly.
Right. It wasn't, that was a proposed addition. But if we can just invoke this case by case basis, we can do that. Is what it says. So this is just a subset of that.
Right.
Yeah, I think we don't want to add something that could be interpreted as restricting our ability to do something on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah. Right, and this is the only thing I could think of that's come up in the past as that special case, but right.
Yeah, but you never know, like there could be other things.
Yeah.
I like it. I think it's a good catch-all, and it gives us the authority
Yeah,
to.
so we'll just, okay. Let's see.
And this will just have to tweak if we
Yeah.
change the VOC thing, but
Mhm.
I mean, I think the concept of the way we've written it makes sense.
Right,
For
and
the-
this might still apply because it's going to say whatever
Right.
concentration we're referring to above.
Or standards.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that paragraph is good. Treatment units, such a treatment units should be installed with the capability of bypassing such units in the event of repair. Oh. Well, that's the optimistic edition.
Well, I also felt if necessary or desired, like what was necessary and what's desired was left me mystified.
Yeah.
As opposed to, I mean, it's incredible flexibility, but no driver either, in a way.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's good. Like I said, and maybe it won't require treatment down the road. So.
Right, and there is other special need, whatever
Yeah.
that may be.
I mean, I know from my systems, they all have bypass valves.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's pretty standard to include bypass valves.
Yeah.
So I don't think that's like an onerous or expensive thing. It's not like we're adding something. They would always be part of it.
All right, anyone have any like thoughts, especially about pitfalls of this, or? No. Mhm.
I don't think so. I mean, like it just gives you the option.
Yeah. All right, this might be a question for Mark, just as highlighted.
Let me see what we have here. So wells, yeah, that's about the groundwater heat pumps and so forth. What was going on? I think these are the geothermal wells. We were dealing with them on actually they were not the closed loop ones at first, and so the board was reviewing the geothermal wells back when they were not closed loops because of the water use. Yep. It was, I think, even on, I remember the well, it was on Western Ave. They were just drawing water and disposing of it after drawing it. And I believe the board met with the applicant, and that's when this became part of the regulations due to the concern.
Oh.
It was a
Oh, so this kind of means that those systems, in pursuit of satisfying the manufacturer's recommendations for proper equipment operation, will not disrupt the quantity or quality of water in nearby wells.
Correct. It was something.
Okay.
And
Okay.
the concern was the draw on the water supply.
All right. Okay. All right. I find it confusing, but at least now I know how I would explain what that means.
And we have
So-
not seen a non-closed loop system. That was the only one we ever saw. It just wastes water, and I think they've come to better technology with the closed loop system for geothermal wells.
And I think the state is planning some more regulations on that too. All right. Is that enough for tonight?
I think it's probably enough for tonight. And I also wonder, are we at a place where, do we feel this is ready to get town council review, or do we think we want to do, one more circulation of the draft version to consider? And
Yeah, I'll try to clean up the text, and then I'll send that around. And
then maybe, so let's have this as a 12/21 agenda item. Is that realistic timeline wise, so that we can then say, yep, this is ready to go for town council feedback, and then we can start working, getting the public hearings scheduled in the new year?
Okay.
Is Daryl allowed to have me take a look at the red line before the meeting? Is
Yep,
that
I think that's totally compliant as long as it's just two of you. So
okay?
if we want to send the version out for all of us to just kind of refresh and be prepared for any comments or questions, and then you guys can do whatever collaboration is necessary as a non-quorum of the board, and then we can discuss on the 12/21 meeting.
Okay, is that helpful, Daryl? That way between
Yeah, that'd be great.
hopefully we can remember everything.
No, but I mean, I think this is real progress, and appreciate the benefit of your joint expertise.
Sure.
But I also feel like our brains are saturated for what we should do for regulatory review for tonight. So for the agenda, I think we've done, I think we've hit all of our topics with the exception of the fiscal year 2024 budget and the 12/21 agenda items. Daryl, I don't, do you remember? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to add maybe for the 21st. In thinking about permits, when we had the long list of permits, I was thinking that we know that we have some folks who might need reminders to get their permits in town. I don't know that I don't think we've usually done that, but I wonder if, for one business in particular that didn't get their permit complete until August or September. Do we want to just,
for like
a friendly reminder, yes or no? That could be a discussion.
I mean, there's some reminder we got in the mail, even though we are not dog owners, but it was like, here is the rule for a dog as a reminder.
Yeah.
Dog permits are due. Here's the rabies vaccine. FYI, tied accounts don't count. And so if we're sort of sending that to everybody in town for this, I do sort of wonder if there's, given the relatively small number of regulated bodies, if there's an easy way to do that. My one caveat is that with Alan out, I'm not sure that I'm enthusiastic. Like, I love it as an idea. I'm not sure if I love it as an idea for this year when we're on lean staffing for the moment.
Yeah. And I kind of don't like adding an extra layer where then it can fall back on us. I was just,
to make sure.
And I don't know if it's unfair to do it for one, although really I don't want to see it drag on a long time. And are we going to shut somebody down if they have forgotten to apply for their permit? Because
another way that could be done too is I worked in another town where we had a penalty fee of double the fee if it wasn't received by January 10th.
Ooh. All right, so maybe that would be a good discussion for next time, because I think things are seeming like they're slipping in certain cases. And are we perceived as too friendly in that? Again, we really just want compliance and we want to help people along to that, but I don't want that. I don't want it to be missed altogether. So that
I like that idea better. It puts the onus on the business owner a little more than like them saying, hey, you forgot to remind me.
Yeah, I like it too. I think it's a good idea.
All right, so we'll have that as an agenda topic for the 21st.
Okay.
And then I can't remember what the continued discussion of fiscal year 2024 budget is. And I hope that's because it was at the 11/16 meeting, which I wasn't at.
Yeah, I think we had some sort of general discussion about areas where we may need to allocate more funds. And I think where we sort of came down to is that a few of us at least said that we needed to sort of see a detailed budget to have a good sense of like where our priorities should lie. I don't know if there's a way to get a copy of last year's or something for posted.
So I do have a copy of something that the finance director sent out that if you'd like to see that for a couple of minutes, or we could just do that next time. I will say that right now things are set up with the standard cost of living adjustment rate applied automatically to those kinds of things. We're going to have a change from no longer having the phone funded by the regional emergency preparedness entity. So that's something that we'll have to take on and expand our budget. And I have also, since we've been working with the HR consultants, I've got them checking on ways for increasing staff hours when it could mean someone going from unbenefited to benefited, and doing benchmarking for Ellen's role, which in every other town, what she does is called a health director. And the last time I looked at comparable salaries in other towns, she's significantly below. So I think that's an adjustment that it's long overdue. And so the HR consultants are helping with that.
As I recall, the other major item was CE money for Mark.
Yes, yeah. And I have been remiss in contacting Tom to have him summarize the additional trainings he's gotten, because when we hired him, part of the deal was depending on what additional trainings he got would affect his rate. And so I just want to cross-check with that. I know he continues to get more education. We just need to see how it matches up with Sherborn's needs for certifications. So that would be the other area. And that I'll send him an email and ask him to just get that.
So I think being able to see some of that data to review it in advance of the next meeting would be helpful.
Okay, so I'll ask Jean Greco to send out the budget that was provided by the finance director. That'll be illuminating, I think, for folks.
Awesome. Sounds good. So for the agenda for the 21st, the items that I see are budget review, check of section 10.1, Washington Street 40B, a discussion of well language as it relates to the GIS requirement, which may end up being an update to the well form. There's one part that looks like sheet needed, but I don't think that was an actual agenda topic. And it just reflects the poor quality of my handwriting. And then, oh, Sweet Meadow, there we go. Sweet Meadow follow-up. With Tom, although it sounds like the concerns have been addressed, but I think worth just having that as the discussion to make sure we're kind of confident we're on track. And then a discussion of fee escalation if applications are late.
I'm wondering if we might need to have the heritage on again. I don't know where that stands.
Why don't I put that, I'll put it to, I've got a follow-up for Tom to just clarify the tobacco regulation conditions, and I will ask him if he thinks we should have that on the agenda for the 21st.
Okay.
Any other, I feel like that covers the topics and is already creating a relatively rich agenda for 4 days before Christmas.
Oh, and I can't recall when this happened now. The reason I also bring up the heritage, I'm losing track of time, whether this happened since our last meeting, that there was a foodborne illness.
I think that would be the context. Yeah, I think that would be the context for revisiting with Tom, would be the foodborne illness report. All right. Well, with that, something to all and to all a good night. Do I have a motion to close the meeting?
So moved.
Second. I'm sure you'll hear no further discussion.
No further discussion.
Daryl, aye.
Matt Beaver's aye.
Lisa, I.
Rebecca Honeywell, aye.
Matt Vitale, aye. Have a great night, guys.